Hello, EnderSword here again, this time with a platinum level game. This one was posted up by our Protoss player Serpan on the TeamLiquid.net strategy forums, and basically he was generally wondering what the hell went wrong here? What can I do against this strategy? And our Zerg player is going to be Anonym up here in the top left-hand corner of the map. So basically, there's going to be a few major things that we look at in this game, culminating towards one little battle at the end of it that we're going to take a few different looks at from a few different angles. The first thing that we're going to look at is just starting yourself up, the idea that you don't want to actually delay yourself. It's good to delay your opponent, but sometimes the cost of delaying your opponent or throwing a wrench in whatever their plans are can actually be more detrimental to you, and we're going to see that shortly. The second thing that we're going to look at is the idea of lining them up. Now, that's obviously a phrase popularized by Day 9 referring to Hellions and workers, but in this case, we're going to be referred to it as technology. You want to make sure that your build is lined up in a specific way that as key pieces of technology are getting done, then certain facilities are ready to actually use those pieces of technology. And generally speaking, if your build doesn't line up in such a way that everything gets used at the appropriate times, then you probably want to rework what you're doing there. The third thing that we're going to look at is the idea that force fields completely decide battles, and they definitely totally do, and we're going to kind of run over the battle at the end of this game a few times to look at what could be improved upon. So for starters here, we see a fairly standard tactic here that we're putting the pylon down to prevent the Zerg from getting this hatchery going. But we're also at 17 supply ourselves. We've got 300 minerals there, and just now he's actually starting the forge. So this probably could have gone down a little faster. He was just basically distracting himself by microing this probe around, by getting that pylon down, and so on. He does let it finish despite the fact that it's being attacked. The Zerg is losing mining time here. However, that investment in that delays the dropping of this nexus. The micro delayed the dropping of the forge. Now, in reality, obviously, you can multitask and do those two things separately. But then the more significant part is once that pylon has been killed, we're now supply blocked. So while it did delay this hatchery for a period of time, it did consume 100 minerals, and it means that we're no longer producing any probes out of anything. He's ultimately delaying the gateway that went down because he had to put another pylon down. So that means the cyber core is going to be much later. He traps himself out there accidentally, obviously just a mistake. And basically everything here is just a lot later than we would really want it to be. If there is Ling pressure coming right now, there's no way a Zealot's out in time. Just 6 to 8 Lings could come in and take this photon cannon out. And there's not really a lot that we could do about it. There's no eyes out on the map right now. So the fact that he's just not making Lings, he easily could have been making Lings. Instead, he's going for the Roach Warren here. But this is really a somewhat defenseless position. So just by delaying that hatchery for like a minute or so, we kind of screwed up our own build order. And that's something that we don't want to be doing, that you don't want to be setting yourself behind just because you were trying to set them behind. So all of this stuff ends up being a lot later than we wanted it to be, and this Zealot isn't going to get out until almost the 6-minute mark. That could be very easily a deadly thing, and we're not going to then get this cyber core done. It's not even going to start warp gate until after like 6 minutes. Everything is just going to be late on this. If the opponent was going for really early aggression, this is just dead. It's absolutely not a build that would hold. Nothing about this would hold. If he goes for a few Lings and a Roach, this would fall. Or a few Roaches, this would fall. If he went for a bunch of Speedlings, this would fall. We have no idea that he's not doing that. And this is around the time that you want to be seeing whether or not a third's been taken. And the fact that it hasn't been taken actually indicates that there would be a lot of aggression behind this. And if there was at this point, there's nothing we could possibly do about it. No further cannons going down, only this one gateway. There's not even a second or third gateway being started at the moment. So just nothing is really lining up the way that we would want it to go to mount towards any sort of attack. There's no way to possibly put pressure on the Zerg right now. What's more is he knows that there's no way that we can put pressure on him. He's had the Overlord just sitting there watching everything for most of the game. He knows that that's not there. This is the first time that he's seen a gas unit out on the field, and he knows it's not a stalker, it's a sentry. He's just got an idea that there's really nothing going on here, so he's perfectly safe to do whatever he wants. So he does take the third there, which we did see this time around. But this could be almost anything. It's the fact that the Zerg has chosen this route. He could have been a lot more aggressive and the game could just be over, so make sure that's not the case. A few chrono boosts have been spent on the cybernetics core to get the warp gate done. However, as I mentioned, there were no more gateways making when we had the money to do that instead of, say, rushing out this robo facility. So now we've got a chronoed out warp gate, but it's really only going to work on this one warp gate, which is making a sentry anyway, so we're not even going to turn into a warp gate right now. So why was this chronoed out in the first place? Why aren't these done? This is just an example of technology that's not lining up. Again, if there was an attack right now, this isn't going to hold anything. It's going to force field the ramp for like 20 seconds as they use a force field each to block the wide ramp. Not going to do much of anything there. And it's much later that these actually get used and that this is actually out and so on. Now we're starting to get to a force that could actually hold something, but it's at 9 minutes in the game. It's just kind of way too late. Had there been anything coming out, he would have died pretty easily to it. And obviously that's the opposite of what you want to do. There are a lot of roaches out there on the map right now. And even still, I would think if they kind of came up, possibly if they charged directly up the ramp, there's enough force fields there. But if they tried to tear down these rocks, or they could basically just contain this army in, make sure that he never got a third while macroing behind it. Protoss player could never really move out with the type of force that he has here, and could just completely contain and get full map control with just the handful of roaches that he's actually got out there already, and it's not even a particularly large army. Now he had the pylon here and warped in just 2 random zealots to go up and attack the third. While in general that's a semi-decent thing to do, you kind of have to do that at the same time as something else. You want to be distracting your opponent. There's no reason to think that 2 zealots would come out of here and create any form of problem for the Zerg player. He could just pull his drones down and his army isn't busy doing anything. Whereas now that the army is actually coming by and attacking, once we know that it's here, now would be an okay time to have warped those 2 zealots in. As this comes up, we see kind of gets flanked from behind. He went up the main ramp. Force fields go down in really random locations, and I'm going to play this battle back probably a couple times, looking at the battle actual formation again, and then looking at other things going on at the same time that this battle is actually happening. The roaches just kind of swarm in. They're obviously trying to target down the immortals as they can. Decent micro with some of the immortals to try and pull them back behind stalkers, but ultimately just too many roaches coming in here, and he does get them all picked off. Reinforcements kind of coming in, but as soon as they're out, they're pretty much destroyed. There's no way for them to kind of mount a defense against this now. Zerg forces obviously just continuously streaming in back from their base. There's no reason for him to be droning or anything like that, so he's just going in for the kill here, and he's clearly going to get it. So Serpan calls out GG and says he kind of knew that this was coming. I don't really know that he did, or at least not early enough. We did have the observer in the area knowing that there were a lot of roaches out there, but a lot of the behavior that he was actually doing doesn't really support that, aside from the fact that, yeah, there were immortals out, which are pretty good against roaches. But we're going to rewind just a little bit to that battle and see where we are. Looking at the initial engagement, I'm actually going to slow this down while we talk about force fields. As they come up here, I like this, that the initial army obviously swung around. He didn't really have much option. It's not like he's going to go all the way back up his ramp and try and engage from down here, given that he was already out in this area. But I don't like that he came out into this area blindly to begin with. But it did actually work out okay here. He didn't really know that anything was coming down, didn't know that an attack was imminent or anything like that, but he kind of hung his army out in a place that was wide open, and you generally don't want to be doing that when you're a relatively small ball of stuff just defended by sentries. The more open the area that you're in, the more force fields that you're going to have to use to get control of that area. But luckily the Zerg player here, instead of going towards the third, just decides to kind of go up the ramp and see what he can actually do up there. So as we see, the initial position is actually really good for the Protoss player. He's crammed up this ramp. 2 force fields right here along the bottom of the ramp would completely cut the Roach army in half. He could then pull back a little and deal with half of it at a time, while half of it basically starts picking off this forge. That upgrade is probably going to be done before he gets it anyway. That's not his primary target. These photon cannons will do a little damage on the front, and he's desperately going to be trying to kind of get out of there. That's not where he wants to be. Even if we lose this forge, even if we lose the upgrade, whatever, that's not going to actually lose us the game. So as we move a little forward here, obviously he doesn't get those force fields off. The entire army backs off, and then these force fields go down. They don't really siphon anything off. What we would have wanted is there's a piece of debris up here or some sort of oasis weird thing with a burn in it, and of course the ramp and the and another obstacle down here. What we could do is actually create a wall in this area, just a straight line of force fields that would have cut off some of the roaches and boxed a lot of them out. Instead, we've got this hole up here. We've got this one that most of them are actually coming through, and a lot of them are completely perfectly in range. There's nothing. These ones are firing, and I think like the 2 in the back aren't. We've got a few over here that are going to have to find another opening. These ones can fire, that one can fire. So these are all doing damage against his army, and unfortunately we've got the sentries right up front. So the thing that we need to control this battle are the first things that are going to die. Even if he had cleaned this up but lost 7 sentries, it's still really bad. The Zerg's not really hurt in any way. This attack isn't even really meant to win the game or anything. It's not like a specific timing. It just kind of works here. So as we play this along, these guys come up and find the hole, and there's no problem for them. There's only about 2 or 3 that aren't actually firing despite dropping down all these force fields. Now that we've moved back, those guys are out of range as everything expires. Certainly a good idea to keep the Immortals going back to where your reinforcement line is, but then they kind of still hang around in the front where they can be target fired down. There's no more sentries left to control this battle at all, so a half-decent job here with 1-1 Protoss units against the just +1 attack Roaches, but just not enough. And again, these units are just going to continue to come down. He is at times, I think it just finished as I went over here, but he is at least chrono boosting some of these warp gates out to make sure that the units get out a little quicker. But I don't like the idea that he's decided to make his last stand right at the third base. When pulling back there, maybe do 1 warp in here, but then try and regroup up the ramp where you're actually potentially going to have some control over what's going on. Odds are that this Nexus is not anything that you're going to be holding, so get into a position that's more defensible and something that, again, you can control by this wall off and that you can control through the use of force fields here. Going to go back just one more time to see what sort of things slip as this attack is happening. So ignore the attack itself, and this time around we see as the attack is initiated, we've actually got another Immortal coming out and just sits there, and then he just waits there for a long period of time. He's going to stay there throughout the whole fight. The robotics facility doesn't get used again, so we know we need Immortals, and we have money for another Immortal out, and that's pretty good against Roaches, but that doesn't get used. All probe production obviously has stopped here. That doesn't get canceled, so I'm not buying the argument that I don't have enough money to make sentries or to make stalkers and this Immortal. So that gets kind of slipped out, and finally he does start one here. these are being chronoed. I do like that, and not enough people do that. However, you can see some of them actually aren't being used immediately after they can be. Does warp in here. Again, I don't like the second and third warp in. I would have preferred to see that up here, potentially with a sentry with it, and try and hold off this ramp. But you can see this second immortal could have been out by now. This immortal could have actually been in the fight for the entire time. If this guy had simply been pulled down front when that initial attack had happened and he was actually out at the time, then this could be a whole other thing. If there were 4 immortals out there as opposed to 3 immortals out there, then you got a few sentries going and then another one finishing up right now, all of a sudden this is a whole different fight, and this could actually probably be dealt with. So anyway, I've dissected that probably enough, but there are a lot of things you can do there with the actual force that was available to him that would have absolutely won that fight. So it wasn't a matter that he didn't have enough material at the time. He had plenty of material to hold that fight. He could have definitely had better macro at that time. There could have definitely been at least 1 more warp in of units, probably 2 more, if he had made these warp gateways a little sooner and dealt with the cybernetics core a little sooner and chronoed out some of the stuff at the robotics facility. There could have been a little more there, and obviously we could have used this guy. But it wasn't a matter of not having enough stuff. It wasn't a matter of not having the right stuff. That's pretty much the composition I would like to have. If someone said, I'm going to attack you with roaches, I pretty much would have built what was there. Even if I knew that's what it was from the beginning, I'd want a bunch of sentries, I'd want some stalkers, and I'd want like 3 or 4 immortals. And that's exactly what we had at this period of time. There's no reason that he actually should have lost to this. So just practice that force field micro. Try and keep in mind what you're trying to do. Cutting the army in half, boxing things out, trying to make sure that some of the roaches, which are only a short range unit, are actually just not able to fire and are running around in the back. If you're just randomly force fielding in places but they can still all fire at you, then you haven't really accomplished anything with that. So I hope that helps, and thanks for watching again, guys.